The smell hit Dr. Jin Sang first. Sweet, cloying, like overripe fruit left to rot in summer heat. He made it 3 steps into the VIP suite before his stomach betrayed him and Seoul's most decorated surgeon vomited onto the imported marble floor. Kimberly Harmon was already there with her mop bucket, invisible as always. She'd been invisible for 3 years in this hospital, another black woman in a faded blue jumpsuit pushing trash bins through hallways where million-won procedures happened behind closed doors. But as she cleaned up the surgeon's mess, she didn't gag, didn't flinch. Instead, she inhaled deeply, and her grandmother's voice echoed across decades and an ocean. "That's nightshade venom," she whispered to no one. Inside room 1207, chaos had a heartbeat. The erratic beep, beep, beep of the cardiac monitor punctuated shouted medical jargon in Korean. Kimberly slipped through the doorway like smoke, emptying biohazard bins while a team of white-coated specialists argued over the body of a dying man. Cheon Young-soo. Even Seoul's business world whispered that name with respect. The dragon tattoo that coiled from his neck down his left arm was famous, infamous really. But right now, that magnificent ink was disappearing beneath something far more terrifying. Black necrotic tissue spread from a wound on his forearm like spilled ink, purple veins crawling up toward his throat like fingers reaching for his heart. He was strapped to the bed, not for his safety, but theirs. Even delirious with fever, drenched in sweat that soaked through the hospital gown, Young-soo radiated danger. His fingers gripped the bed rail so hard the metal had bent. Men in black suits lined the hallway outside, guns barely concealed, their faces carved from stone and violence. "We need to amputate," Dr. Jin Sang said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "It's the only option left." "Amputation won't save him," another surgeon, younger, pointed at the monitor showing Young-soo's vitals spiraling. "The infection has already entered his bloodstream. Even if we take the arm, the sepsis will kill him within hours." Kimberly's hands stilled on the trash bin. She looked at Young-soo's neck, at those purple veins spreading like roots. She'd seen this before, not in this sterile high-tech hospital, but in her grandmother's garden in Louisiana, in the humid shacks where old women still practiced medicine that predated textbooks. This wasn't gangrene. This wasn't infection. This was viper's kiss poison, a neurotoxin so rare that most modern doctors had never even heard of it. A weapon from another era, used by assassins who wanted their victims to die slowly, in agony, while the best medicine money could buy did nothing but watch. And every antibiotic they'd pumped into Young-soo's veins had fed the poison, made it stronger, spread it faster. "He has less than an hour," Kimberly heard herself say. The room went silent. 12 sets of eyes turned towards the cleaning woman who dared to speak. Dr. Jin Sang's face twisted with contempt. "Excuse me?" Kimberly's throat went dry. She was nobody here. A foreigner, a cleaner. She'd come to Korea 3 years ago chasing better pay, ended up scrubbing floors for doctors who looked through her like glass. One word out of line and she'd lose her visa, lose everything. But she looked at Young-soo, really looked at him, saw the way his chest heaved with each labored breath, saw the fear buried beneath the fever in his dark eyes, the eyes that must have ordered terrible things, yes, but that were still human, still afraid of dying. "Nothing," she said quietly, turning back to her trash bin. "I'm sorry." She left the room, but her heart was hammering. She'd recognized the poison. And on her balcony, in a cramped studio apartment in Itaewon, growing among common flowers in a ceramic pot, was the antidote, a gnarled, ugly root her grandmother had called silent mercy, the only thing that could draw a viper's kiss from a wound before it stopped the heart. Kimberly pushed her cleaning cart down the hallway, past the armed men who didn't see her, past nurses who brushed by without acknowledgement. She checked her watch. 11:47 p.m. Her shift ended at midnight. Behind her, through the door of room 1207, Dr. Jin Sang's voice, cold and final. "Prepare the family. There's nothing more we can do." She stopped, turned, looked back at that door. 1 hour. That's all young Sue had left. And Kimberly Harmon, invisible cleaning woman, daughter of Louisiana herb healers, was the only person in this entire hospital who knew how to save him. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone, checking the subway schedule. She could make it home and back in 40 minutes, could grab the herb, grind it into paste, slip back into the hospital before... "Miss Harmon?" Dr. Jin Sang stood in the doorway, and his expression made her blood freeze. "A word, please." She followed him to a corner of the hallway, away from the guards. Up close, she could see the exhaustion in his face, the expensive cologne that couldn't quite cover the smell of vomit. "I need you to understand something," he said in English, quiet and precise. "That man in there is dying. When he dies, there will be complications, police, investigations, gang retaliation. This hospital cannot afford to be associated with his death." He straightened his white coat. "We've done everything we can. The family will understand. It was simply his time." Something in his tone was wrong, too smooth, too practiced. Kimberly's eyes narrowed. "You're letting him die." "I'm a doctor, not a miracle worker. Sometimes patients—" "You know what's wrong with him." The words came out before she could stop them. "And you're letting him die anyway." Dr. Jin Sang's face went very still. For 3 heartbeats he just stared at her. Then he smiled, and it was the most frightening thing she'd seen all night. "You're tired, Miss Harmon. Your shift is over. Go home. Forget you were ever in that room." He leaned closer. "Forget you ever saw anything at all. Do you understand?" She understood perfectly. Someone had paid Seoul's top surgeon to let a Mafia boss die quietly. No questions asked, no gang war, just a tragic failure of modern medicine. Kimberly nodded, eyes down, playing the role she'd perfected over 3 years. "Yes, doctor, I understand." She turned and walked away, pushing her cart toward the service elevator. Behind her, Dr. Jin Sang returned to room 1207 to pronounce the inevitable. But Kimberly wasn't going home. She was going to the janitor's closet on the 3rd floor, where she'd hidden a small stone mortar 2 months ago. She was going to crush the herb she carried in her jacket pocket, because she'd learned long ago to keep a cutting of silent mercy with her always, a piece of her grandmother's wisdom she couldn't quite leave behind. And then she was going to save a dying man's life, even if it meant risking her own. The service elevator descended in darkness, and Kimberly's hands finally steadied. She'd been invisible for 3 years. Tonight, they were going to see her. Before we start, go ahead and subscribe, like this video, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It truly means a lot to me seeing our storytelling family grow across continents and time zones. Every view, every share, every comment helps us bring these incredible stories to life together. Now, settle in somewhere comfortable, because this is a story about the moment when everything you thought you knew gets turned upside down, when the invisible becomes unforgettable. The janitor's closet on the 3rd floor smelled like industrial bleach and desperation. Kimberly's hands shook as she pulled the cutting of silent mercy from her jacket pocket, a small bundle wrapped in damp paper towel that she'd been carrying for 2 months. The janitor's closet on the 3rd floor smelled like industrial bleach and desperation. Kimberly's hands shook as she pulled the cutting of Silent Mercy from her jacket pocket, a small bundle wrapped in damp paper towel that she'd been carrying for 2 months, ever since she'd felt the first whisper of homesickness that made her pot a piece of her grandmother's garden on her balcony. The root was small, barely the length of her thumb, its skin mottled brown and gray like something already half dead. But when she crushed it between her fingers, the smell that rose was sharp and clean, like mint and earth and something else, something that made her think of her grandmother's hands, rough and capable, mixing salves in the Louisiana heat. It wasn't enough, not nearly enough. Kimberly checked her watch. 11:52 p.m., 8 minutes until her shift ended. Young Sue had maybe an hour before the poison reached his heart. She made her decision in the space between heartbeats. The subway platform was nearly empty at midnight, just a few salary men sleeping off soju and a couple of teenagers glued to their phones. Kimberly stood by the yellow line, bouncing on her toes, watching the tunnel for the train's lights. Her mind was already at her apartment, already on her balcony, already grinding the full root into paste. 15 minutes to Itaewon, 5 minutes to her building, 10 minutes to prepare the herb, 15 minutes back. 45 minutes total, if the trains ran on time, if nothing went wrong, if young Sue could hold on just a little longer. The train arrived in a rush of recycled air and fluorescent light. Kimberly squeezed through the closing doors and spent the entire ride standing, unable to sit, unable to be still. Through the window, Seoul blurred past in streaks of neon and shadow, a city that had never quite felt like home, a place where she would always be a foreigner, no matter how perfect her Korean became. Her building was a narrow tower squeezed between a convenience store and a noraebang, the kind of place where the elevator only worked half the time and the walls were thin enough to hear your neighbors breathing. Tonight, the elevator was broken. She took the stairs 3 at a time, her work shoes slapping against concrete, her breath coming in gasps by the time she reached the 5th floor. Her apartment was barely larger than young Sue's hospital room, a single room with a fold-down bed, a 2-burner stove, and a bathroom the size of a closet. But it was hers, paid for with money she sent home to her sister every month, with enough left over to keep herself fed and to maintain the one luxury she couldn't live without, the balcony. She'd spent 3 months coaxing that balcony to life. It was barely wide enough for her to stand with her arms outstretched, but she'd filled it with pots, tomatoes and basil, lavender and chamomile, and in the far corner, hidden behind a cascade of morning glories, the ugly ceramic pot where Silent Mercy grew. The root was bigger now than when she'd planted it, thicker, more gnarled. It had thrived in Seoul's summer heat, fed by the same humidity that made her miss home. Kimberly dug her fingers into the soil, felt the root's resistance, and pulled. It came up in a shower of dirt, pale tendrils clinging to the main body like veins. In the moonlight, it almost looked like a tiny, twisted human figure, arms and legs and a bulbous head. Her grandmother had said Silent Mercy only grew where someone had died in pain, that it fed on suffering and turned it into salvation. Looking at it now, Kimberly believed her. She washed the root in her sink, scrubbing away the soil until the pale flesh beneath showed through. Then she pulled out the stone mortar she'd bought at a traditional market in Insadong. The vendor had looked at her strangely when she'd insisted on stone, not ceramic, explaining in broken Korean that her grandmother had taught her you needed rock to release the medicine from certain roots. The grinding was meditative, almost hypnotic. She worked the pestle in circles, feeling the root break down into fibers, then paste. The smell intensified, that sharp, clean scent, but underneath it something darker, earthier, like the smell of a grave after rain. Her grandmother had made her memorize the exact consistency, thick enough to stay in place, thin enough to seep into the wound. Too thick, and it would sit on the surface, useless. Too thin, and it would run off before it could work. Kimberly added 3 drops of water from her bottle, ground it in, added 2 more drops, ground again. Perfect. She scraped the paste into a small glass jar she'd saved from the hospital, the kind they used for specimen samples. Maybe 2 tablespoons worth. Not much, but it would have to be enough. She sealed it tight, wrapped it in paper towel to keep it from sloshing, and tucked it into the deep pocket of her janitor's jumpsuit. 12:17 a.m. Young Sue had maybe 40 minutes left, and she was still in Itaewon. The subway ride back felt 3 times longer than the ride out. Kimberly stood by the doors, willing the train to move faster, watching the station names flash by in Korean and English. Noksapyong, Samgakji, Sinyongsan. Each stop was a small eternity, passengers shuffling on and off with the urgency of sleepwalkers. When the train finally pulled into Seoul Station, she ran. Up the stairs, through the underground mall that connected to the hospital complex, past the late-night coffee shops and convenience stores. Her legs burned, her lungs screamed, but she didn't slow down until she burst through the employee entrance of Seoul Memorial Hospital, her ID badge swinging wildly from its lanyard. The night security guard looked up from his phone. "Harmonshi? Your shift ended an hour ago." "Forgot my phone," Kimberly gasped, bending over, hands on her knees. "In the locker room." He waved her through without interest, already back to his phone. She headed toward the women's locker room, then veered off at the last second toward the service corridor. This was the part of the hospital only cleaning staff and maintenance workers knew. The narrow hallways that ran behind the walls, the freight elevators that smelled like garbage and antiseptic, the ventilation access points that let you travel between floors without being seen. But when she reached the service elevator that would take her to the VIP wing, she stopped short. There were guards now, 4 of them, stationed at every entrance to the corridor that led to room 1207. Men in black suits with the kind of builds that came from violence, not gyms. They hadn't been there an hour ago. Kimberly backed into the shadows, heart hammering. Of course there were more guards. Young Sue was dying. His people would be preparing for war, for retaliation, for whatever came after their boss took his last breath. She couldn't walk past them, couldn't talk her way through. She was nobody, a cleaner, and if they searched her and found the jar of paste, the ventilation shaft. She'd cleaned ductwork before, knew which shafts were large enough to crawl through and which ones led where. It was miserable work, cramped and dusty and hot, but right now it was her only option. Kimberly found the access panel on the wall near the freight elevator, the kind maintenance used to check air filters. She pulled out her multi-tool, a gift from the head janitor when she'd first started, the only thing she owned that felt like real professional equipment, and unscrewed the panel as quietly as she could. The shaft beyond was dark and narrow, but just wide enough for her shoulders. She pulled herself up and in, replacing the panel behind her. The metal was cold against her palms and knees as she crawled forward, following the faint sound of air circulation and the layout she'd memorized over 3 years of late-night cleaning shifts. Left at the junction, straight through the long shaft that ran above the 3rd-floor hallway. Up the vertical section, awkward, bracing her back against one wall and her feet against the other, inching upward in the darkness. Right at the 4th-floor junction. The shaft was smaller here, tighter. Kimberly's shoulders scraped against the sides. Dust filled her nose and mouth. She could hear voices below, muffled by layers of metal and insulation. Doctors discussing patient cases. Nurses gossiping about the cafeteria food. Someone's phone ringing with a K-pop song she didn't recognize. And then, louder, closer. Prepare the morphine drip. Make him comfortable for the end. Dr. Jin Sang's voice. Kimberly froze, trying to orient herself. She was directly above the VIP wing now, maybe 20 feet from room 1207. She crawled forward until she reached a vent that looked down into a storage room, empty except for stacks of linens and medical supplies. The vent cover was held by 4 screws, old and loose from years of humidity. She worked them free with her multi-tool, catching the cover before it could fall and clatter against the floor below. Then she lowered herself through the opening, hung for a moment from the lip of the shaft, and dropped. The landing was harder than she'd expected. Pain shot through her ankles, but nothing twisted or broke. She stayed low, listening. Footsteps in the hallway outside, but they passed without stopping. Voices farther away, arguing about something in rapid Korean. Kimberly cracked the storage room door open and peered into the hallway. The VIP wing at night was a different world from the chaos of daytime. Dimmer lights cast long shadows. Only a skeleton crew of nurses remained, moving between rooms like ghosts. And standing outside room 1207, Dr. Jin Sang stood alone. He was on his phone, turned away from the hallway, his voice low but urgent. Kimberly's survival instincts screamed at her to hide, to wait until he left. But something about his posture, the tension in his shoulders, the way he kept glancing at young Sue's door, made her edge closer, pressing herself against the wall, straining to hear. "Don't care how it looks," Dr. Jin Sang was saying in Korean, his accent crisp and educated. "The job is done. He'll be dead within the hour, and there will be no evidence of anything but natural progression of the infection." A pause. "I said I don't care. Your concerns are not my problem. My concern is getting my pay." Kimberly's blood went cold. The antibiotics did exactly what you said they would, fed the poison instead of fighting it. Even if another specialist examined him now, they'd just see advanced septic shock from an antibiotic-resistant infection. Tragic, but not suspicious. Another pause, longer this time. "No, I did not tell them about the neurotoxin. Why would I? I want my money, not a gang war on my doorstep." He listened to whoever was on the other end, his free hand drumming against his thigh. "The girl? What girl?" A sharp exhale. "The cleaning woman? She's nothing, saw nothing. If she had any real knowledge, she wouldn't be mopping floors." A cold laugh. "Fine, if it makes you feel better, I'll have her work visa reviewed. She'll be deported within the week. But she's not a threat, she's barely literate." The words hit Kimberly like physical blows. She pressed her hand over her mouth to keep from making a sound. Dr. Jin Sang, respected, decorated, Seoul's top surgeon, was being paid to murder Yang Soo, and as a bonus, he was going to destroy her life just for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. "Yes, yes, I'll call you the moment it's done, and then you'll wire the second half of the payment. Don't make me wait this time." He ended the call and slipped his phone into his white coat pocket. For a long moment, he just stood there, staring through the viewing window at Yang Soo's dying form. Then he straightened his shoulders, put on his professional expression, and walked into the room. Kimberly stood in the shadows, her whole body shaking with rage and fear, and something else, something righteous and burning that felt like her grandmother's hands on her shoulders, pushing her forward. This wasn't just about saving a life anymore. This was about justice. She looked at the jar of paste in her pocket, looked at the door to room 1207. Dr. Jin Sang would be in there maybe 5 minutes, checking vitals, adjusting the morphine drip, making his final notes before he pronounced Yang Soo beyond saving. 5 minutes. That's all she had to figure out how to get past 4 armed guards, bypass whatever security Dr. Jin Sang had set up, and apply the antidote to a wound that was probably crawling with infection and death, all without getting shot in the process. The smart thing would be to go to the police to report what she'd heard, let them handle it. But Kimberly knew how that would play out. A foreign cleaning woman accusing Seoul's most respected surgeon of murder for hire? They'd laugh her out of the station before they deported her. And by then, Yong-soo would be dead. She watched through the viewing window as Dr. Jin Sang adjusted the IV line, his movements practiced and efficient. He checked his watch, made a note on his clipboard, and said something to the 2 bodyguards who stood on either side of Young-soo's bed. They were massive men, all shoulders and scar tissue, the kind who looked like they'd been born knowing how to hurt people. One of them, the one with the scar across his nose, Tank, she'd heard the nurses call him, said something in response. Dr. Jin Sang shook his head, gestured at the monitors showing Young-soo's declining vitals, and shrugged with what looked like genuine regret. The performance was perfect. Kimberly almost believed it herself. Dr. Jin Sang left the room, and the guards followed him out, taking up positions in the hallway. Through the window, Kimberly could see Young-soo alone in the bed, his chest rising and falling in shallow, labored breaths. The black necrosis had spread further up his arm, visible even from this distance. The purple veins crawled across his collarbone now, reaching for his throat like fingers. She didn't have much time. Kimberly pulled out her phone and set a timer for 4 minutes, long enough for Dr. Jin Sang to clear the wing, short enough that Young-soo might still be conscious. Then she took a deep breath, touched the jar in her pocket like a talisman, and stepped out of her hiding place. She walked straight toward room 1207 like she belonged there, like she was just a cleaner doing her job, invisible as always. The guard saw her coming but didn't react. She was wearing her uniform, had her ID badge, looked like exactly what she was supposed to be. "Excuse me," she said in Korean, keeping her eyes down, her voice soft. "I need to clean the floor. There's vomit from earlier." Tank looked at her, then at the other guard. They had a brief conversation in low voices. Then Tank nodded once. "Make it quick. Don't touch anything medical." "Yes, sir." Kimberly pushed her cleaning cart into the room, her heart beating so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. The guards stayed outside, visible through the window, but they weren't watching her. They were watching the hallway, watching for threats from outside. They didn't see the threat that was already in the room. Young-soo's eyes were closed, his face gray and slicked with sweat. Up close, the smell of the wound was overpowering, that sweet rot that had made Dr. Jin Sang vomit, but underneath it the sharper chemical smell of the poison itself. The wound was worse than she'd thought. The flesh around the initial cut was completely black, weeping a clear fluid that smelled like burnt sugar. The purple veins had spread across his shoulder and up his neck, pulsing faintly with his heartbeat. She didn't have 4 minutes. She had 2, maybe less. Kimberly pulled the jar from her pocket with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. She unscrewed the lid, and the sharp, clean smell of silent mercy filled the small space around the bed. It cut through the rot like a blade through silk. Young-soo's eyes snapped open. For one terrible moment, they just stared at each other. His eyes were black and feverish and completely aware, predatory in a way that made every survival instinct in her body scream run. Even dying, even delirious, he was the most dangerous thing she'd ever been close to. "Who?" His voice was barely a whisper, raw and broken. "Who are you?" "Nobody," Kimberly said, and it was the truth. "I'm nobody, but I can save your life." His eyes traveled from her face to the jar in her hands, to the green paste inside. "What is that?" "Medicine. Real medicine. Not what the doctors have been giving you." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. The poison in your wound, it's not an infection. It's called viper's kiss. Every antibiotic they've pumped into you has been feeding it, making it stronger. That's why you're dying." Something flickered in his expression. Understanding, maybe, or just the lucidity that sometimes came right before the end. "And you just happen to have the cure?" he rasped. "In a jar? How convenient. My grandmother taught me. Traditional medicine, before hospitals, before antibiotics. This herb, it draws the poison out. I've seen it work." "Or you're here to finish me off." Young Sue's hand moved slightly under the sheets, and she realized he was holding something, a knife probably. Even in a hospital bed, even dying, he was armed. "Why should I trust you?" "Because you're dead anyway," bluntly Kimberly said. "In 30 minutes, maybe less, the poison hits your heart and you stop breathing. Dr. Jin Sang knows it. Your guards know it. Everyone in this hospital knows it. So what do you have to lose?" His eyes studied her face for what felt like forever. Then, so quietly she almost didn't hear it. "Do it." Kimberly moved fast before she could second-guess herself. She pulled back the sheet covering his arm, and the sight made her stomach lurch. The wound was a crater of dead flesh, black and glistening, surrounded by skin that looked like it had been painted with purple ink. She could see the tendons beneath, white and stringy, and when she leaned close, she could hear a faint hissing sound, the poison eating its way deeper. She scooped a generous amount of paste onto her fingers and pressed it directly into the wound. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. The paste bubbled on contact with the poisoned flesh, releasing a white steam that smelled like burning metal. Young Sue's entire body went rigid, his back arching off the bed, and a sound came out of him that wasn't quite a scream, more like something being torn out of him by force. The door burst open. "Get away from him!" Tank had his gun out, and it was pointed directly at Kimberly's head. The second guard rushed to the bed, grabbed her by the shoulders, and yanked her backward so hard she heard something pop in her neck. "She's killing him!" Tank shouted. "She's putting something in the wound!" "It's medicine!" Kimberly gasped, struggling against the guard's grip. "It's the antidote! Look at the wound! Look!" But no one was looking at the wound. They were looking at young Sue, who was thrashing in the bed, his eyes rolled back, foam flecking his lips. The monitors were going crazy, alarm shrieking, his heart rate spiking to 180, 190, 200. "You killed him," Tank said, and his voice was absolutely calm. He raised the gun to her temple. "Wait," the second guard said. "Wait, look at the monitor." The heart rate was dropping. 190, 170, 150, settling into something that almost looked normal, and young Sue had stopped thrashing. His breathing was still labored, but it was deeper now, steadier. And the wound was changing. The black necrotic tissue was sloughing away, dissolving under the green paste like ice under hot water. Fresh pink flesh showed underneath, raw but clean. The purple veins on his neck were receding, fading from dark purple to light purple to just the faintest bruising. "What the heck?" Tank lowered his gun slightly, staring. Young Sue's eyes opened, clear-headed this time, focused. He looked at his arm, at the paste still bubbling gently in the wound, at the clean flesh emerging from beneath the rot. Then he looked at Kimberly, still held by the guard, and something like wonder crossed his face. "Let her go," he said. His voice was stronger now, no longer a whisper. "Let her finish." The guard released her so suddenly she stumbled. Tank still had his gun out, but was lowering it slowly, his expression caught between suspicion and shock. Kimberly returned to the bedside on shaking legs. She applied more paste to the edges of the wound, working it in with her fingers. Each application produced that same violent bubbling reaction, that same smell of burning metal. but each time more black tissue dissolved, more clean flesh emerged. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, she worked in silence, aware of Tank's gun, aware of the guard's eyes on her, aware of young Sue watching her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Finally, she sat back. The wound was still open, still raw, but it was clean. No more black tissue, no more purple veins. Just a deep cut that would need stitches and proper bandaging, but that would heal normally now. Young Sue sat up slowly, testing his body. Color was returning to his face. The fever sweat was drying on his skin. He flexed his fingers, rolled his shoulder, and let out a long, shuddering breath. "How do you feel?" Kimberly asked. "Like I was dead and came back." Then, to Tank, "Get Dr. Jin Sang, now." Tank hesitated for just a moment, then holstered his gun and left. The second guard remained, but he'd moved to the corner of the room, giving them space. Young Sue turned his full attention to Kimberly. "What's your name?" "Kimberly Harmon." "Well, Kimberly Harmon," he smiled, and it was sharp and dangerous and full of promise. "It seems I owe you my life." "You don't owe me anything," Kimberly said, but her voice shook. The adrenaline was wearing off now, leaving her hollow and terrified. She'd just performed an illegal medical procedure on a mafia boss in a foreign country. She'd broken about 15 laws, violated her work contract, and probably guaranteed her deportation. "I disagree," young Sue said softly. He was still looking at his arm, at the clean wound where death had been eating him alive minutes before. "But we'll discuss payment later. First, I want to hear what you know about Dr. Jin Sang." Kimberly's stomach dropped. Don't lie to me." His voice was still soft, but there was steel underneath it now. "You didn't risk your life to save a stranger out of pure altruism. You knew something. Tell me." She hesitated, weighing her options, but she'd come this far, might as well finish it. "I heard him on the phone," she said quietly, "about 20 minutes ago. He was talking to someone, telling them you'd be dead within the hour, that the antibiotics had fed the poison like they'd planned, that he wanted his money." Young Sue's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "What else?" "He said even if another specialist examined you, they'd just see septic shock from antibiotic-resistant infection, nothing suspicious, no evidence of poison." She swallowed hard. "And he said if it made his contact feel better, he'd have my work visa reviewed, have me deported within the week." "Because you saw too much." "Because I'm nobody," Kimberly corrected, "barely literate, according to him." Young Sue was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached for the call button beside his bed and pressed it. Not the nurse call button, a different one, black instead of white. Within seconds, 2 more guards entered the room, moving with the kind of efficiency that suggested they'd been waiting just outside. "Find Dr. Jin Sang," young Sue said to them in Korean. "Bring him here. If he resists, hurt him. Not too much. I want him conscious. And check his phone. I want to know who he's been talking to." The guards nodded and left. Tank returned moments later, and his expression was grim. "Dr. Jin Sang is gone. Security says he left through the Jin Sang garage 10 minutes ago. We've got people tracking his car, but—" "He ran." Young Sue's voice was ice. "He knew the timing, knew I'd be dead by now, knew the chaos that would follow. He ran the moment he thought it was safe." "We'll find him," Tank promised. "I know you will." Young Sue shifted in the bed, testing his strength. The movement was careful, controlled, but you could see how much effort it took. He was alive, but he wasn't healthy. Not yet. "But right now, I want to know who else is involved. Someone in this hospital helped arrange this. Someone gave him access, helped him disguise the poison as infection, made sure the antibiotics kept flowing. He looked at Kimberly. You work here. You see things other people miss. Who else was involved? She thought back over the past week, over the parade of specialists who'd examined Yong-Soo's wound, the nurses who'd administered the antibiotics, the administrative staff who'd processed the orders. Most of them had seemed genuinely baffled by the case, frustrated by their inability to help. But there had been one person who'd seemed almost satisfied by Yong-Soo's decline. The director of hospital operations, Kimberly said slowly, Mr. Cho. He was here yesterday when Dr. Jin Sang announced that amputation was the only option. Most of the staff looked upset, but Mr. Cho just nodded like it was expected. And he's the one who approved keeping your room completely isolated, no second opinions from outside specialists. Yong-Soo absorbed this, then turned to Tank. Bring me Cho. Not here, somewhere private. I want to have a conversation with him before the police get involved. Tank's smile was not pleasant. With pleasure. As he left, Yong-Soo settled back against his pillows, exhausted but alert. The heart monitor showed his vitals returning to something approaching normal. Heart rate steady at 78, blood pressure stabilizing, oxygen saturation climbing toward 95%. The transformation was remarkable. 20 minutes ago, he'd been dying. Now he looked like a man recovering from surgery, weak but viable. You should rest, Kimberly said. Your body's been through trauma. The antidote stopped the poison, but you'll need time to heal. I've rested enough. He studied her with those dark, predatory eyes. How long have you worked here? 3 years. And before that? I was in Louisiana. My grandmother raised me after my parents died. She taught me traditional medicine, herbs, roots, things that grew wild in the bayou. I came to Korea for work, to send money home to my sister. The words came out faster than she intended, nervous energy making her babble. I thought I'd just be here a year, maybe 2, but the money was better than anything I could make back home, so I stayed. Kept my head down, kept cleaning floors, kept pretending I didn't know more than the doctors sometimes. Why didn't you use that knowledge? You could have worked in medicine even without formal training. Kimberly laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'm a black woman with no degree working on a visa in a foreign country. Who would hire me? Who would listen to me? I tried once, in my first month here, told a nurse that a patient's symptoms looked like a reaction to medication, not a new infection. She reported me to my supervisor for overstepping. I almost lost my job. She shook her head. So I learned to be invisible. It's safer that way. Young-Soo was quiet for a moment. You weren't invisible tonight. No, she agreed softly. I wasn't. The door opened and a nurse entered, young, maybe mid-20s, with wide eyes that went even wider when she saw Young-Soo sitting up. She'd probably been told to prepare for a death, not a recovery. Mr. Cheon, you're awake. How do you feel? Better. I need the wound properly cleaned and bandaged, and I need fluids. Saline, not antibiotics. No more antibiotics. His voice was firm, commanding. And get me whoever's in charge of this floor. I want to speak with them immediately. The nurse nodded and fled. Within minutes, the room was filling with staff, nurses, a resident doctor, a supervisor. They stared at Young-Soo like he was a ghost, which in a way he was. They'd all been prepared for his death. Some of them probably had already started the paperwork. Kimberly tried to slip out during the chaos, to disappear back into invisibility, but Young-Soo's voice stopped her. Miss Harmon stays. Every eye in the room turned to her, the cleaner in the faded blue jumpsuit, standing in the corner with an empty jar in her pocket and fear written across her face. She's the reason I'm alive. Whatever treatment you're planning, you run it by her first. Understood? The medical staff exchanged confused glances, but they nodded. You didn't argue with Chun Young-soo, not if you wanted to keep breathing. For the next 2 hours, Kimberly stood beside his bed while doctors examined the wound, took blood samples, ran scans. She explained the poison as best she could, described how the antidote worked, warned them about potential secondary effects. They listened with varying degrees of skepticism and wonder, but they listened. The wound itself was remarkable. Where there had been black necrotic tissue, there was now clean pink flesh, raw but healing. The doctors cleaned it, applied proper bandaging, started him on fluids and pain medication. His vitals continued to improve. By 3 a.m., he was sitting up without assistance, arguing with Tank about security protocols. By 4 a.m., Tank returned with Mr. Cho. The director of hospital operations was a small man in an expensive suit, his thinning hair carefully combed to hide his bald spot. When he saw Young-soo alive and alert, all color drained from his face. "Mr. Chan," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I was told you were dying?" Young-soo finished. "I was, but I got better. Funny how that works." Cho's eyes darted around the room, landing on Kimberly for just a moment before skittering away. "I don't understand. Dr. Jin Sang said a lot of things." Young-soo's voice was conversational, almost friendly. It was the most terrifying sound Kimberly had ever heard. "Most of them were lies, but you knew that, didn't you, Mr. Cho?" I have no idea what. Your phone records say otherwise." Tank stepped forward, holding up a smartphone that definitely wasn't his. 14 calls to Dr. Jin Sang over the past week. 6 calls to a number registered to the Shin family. You want to explain that? The Shin family. Even Kimberly knew that name. They were one of the 3 major organizations that controlled Seoul's underworld and the Chan Syndicate's biggest rivals. Cho's face went from white to gray. Please, I can explain." "I'm listening." Young-soo leaned back against his pillows, looking almost relaxed, but Kimberly could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand rested just within reach of the knife she knew was hidden somewhere in the bed. They threatened my family," Cho stammered. "My daughter. They said if I didn't help, if I didn't keep the outside specialists away, they'd..." He choked on the words. "I didn't want to. I swear I didn't want to. But they had photos of my daughter leaving school, of my wife at the market. They said it would look like an accident." Young-soo studied him for a long moment. "And Dr. Jin Sang?" "They paid him. A lot. Enough that he didn't need threats." Cho's voice was barely audible now. "He was supposed to let the poison work, make it look natural. By the time anyone suspected foul play, you'd be dead, and he'd be in another country." "But I'm not dead," Young-soo smiled, sharp and cold. "Thanks to Miss Harmon here, which means Dr. Jin Sang's plan failed, which means everyone involved is now exposed." He paused. "Including you." "Please," Cho was crying now, tears streaming down his face. "Please, my family had nothing to do with this. It was just me. Just me." Young-soo looked at Tank. "Verify his story. If his family really was threatened, get them somewhere safe. The Shin family likes to tie up loose ends." Then to Cho, "You're going to give the police everything. Every phone call, every meeting, Every piece of evidence that connects Dr. Jin Sang and the Shin family to this. You're going to cooperate fully, and in exchange, I'll make sure your family stays safe." Cho nodded frantically. "Yes, yes, anything." "Take him," Young-soo said to Tank. "Make sure he doesn't accidentally fall down any stairs on the way to the police station." As they led Cho away, the room fell silent. It was just Young-soo and Kimberly now, the medical staff having been dismissed hours ago. Dawn was starting to break outside the window, painting the Seoul skyline in shades of pink and gold. "You're exhausted," Young-soo observed. Kimberly realized she was swaying on her feet. She'd been awake for nearly 24 hours, had crawled through ventilation shafts, had saved a man's life, and exposed a conspiracy. Her body was screaming for rest. "I should go," she said. "My shift starts in 4 hours and—" "No." The single word stopped her cold. "No?" she repeated. "You're not going back to cleaning floors." Young-soo shifted in the bed, his expression serious. "You saved my life. That comes with consequences. Good ones in this case, but consequences nonetheless." "I don't want money," Kimberly said quickly. "I just wanted to—" "I know. You wanted to do the right thing. But that doesn't change the facts. You exposed a conspiracy, humiliated Seoul's top surgeon, and proved that traditional medicine can outperform modern science. You think the hospital administration is going to let you go back to being invisible after this?" She hadn't thought about that. Hadn't thought past saving his life. "Dr. Jin Song is gone, but not arrested yet," Young-soo continued. "The Shin family knows their plan failed. They'll be looking for loose ends. And you, Miss Harmon, are a very loose end. You need protection. You need resources. And you need a position that matches your actual abilities." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I own this hospital as of about 3 hours ago." He smiled at her shocked expression. "Tank handled the paperwork while you were playing doctor. Seoul Memorial Hospital is now a subsidiary of Cheon Enterprises, which means I control everything. Staffing, budgets, policies, all of it." "You bought the hospital?" "I bought the controlling shares. Same thing." He leaned forward, and despite his weakness in his body, his eyes were sharp and focused. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to be named Director of Integrative Medicine, a new position I just created. Your job will be to work with our doctors, to bring traditional healing knowledge into modern practice, to save lives the way you saved mine. Full salary, full benefits, and enough security that the Shin family won't dare touch you." Kimberly stared at him. "I can't. I'm not qualified." "You're more qualified than half the doctors in this building. You just proved that." Young-soo's voice softened slightly. "I'm not asking you to run the hospital. I'm asking you to do what you do best. See what others miss, heal what others can't, and teach these arrogant doctors that their fancy degrees don't mean they know everything." She thought about her tiny apartment, her balcony garden, the 3 years of invisibility. Thought about her grandmother's hands mixing medicine in the Louisiana heat, about all that knowledge passed down through generations, dismissed as primitive by people who'd never bothered to understand it. "What about Dr. Jin Song?" she asked quietly. "What about him?" "They'll need me to testify." "They will," Young-soo agreed, "and you will, but you'll do it from a position of strength, not as a cleaning woman who can barely afford rent. You'll do it as Dr. Harmon, Director of Integrative Medicine, with the full weight of the Cheon Syndicate." "I'm not a doctor. I don't have a degree." "Then we'll get you one. Honorary doctorate from Seoul National University. Tank's already making calls. Or, if you prefer, we'll fund your return to medical school. Full tuition, and hold your position until you graduate with proper credentials. Your choice." It was too much, too fast. Kimberly's head was spinning. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why do all this? You could just pay me and send me on my way." Young Soo was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the rising sun. "Because I was dead," he said finally. "Truly dead. The best doctors in Seoul had given up on me. My own people were preparing for war. And then a woman I'd never met, a woman who had every reason to let me die, risked everything to save me." He turned back to her. "You didn't do it for money or power or favor. You did it because it was right, because you saw someone suffering and you knew how to help." His smile was small and genuine. "People like that are rare in my world, Miss Harmon. I'd be a fool to let you disappear back into invisibility." "People like that usually don't last long in your world," Kimberly said quietly. "No," Young Soo agreed, "they don't. Which is why you'll have protection. Tank and his team will make sure nothing happens to you, and anyone who tries to hurt you will learn very quickly why crossing the Cheon Syndicate is a fatal mistake." Kimberly looked at him, really looked at him. He was still pale, still weak from his brush with death, but there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Something like respect, like recognition. "I need to think about it," she said. "Take all the time you need. You have about 3 hours before the hospital administration holds an emergency meeting to figure out what to do about the fact that I'm still alive and now own their hospital." He smiled. "I'd like to have an answer by then, preferably one that involves you standing next to me when I fire half the executive staff." Despite everything, the exhaustion, the fear, the absolute insanity of the past 6 hours, Kimberly found herself smiling back. "You're really going to fire them?" Everyone who knew about Dr. Jin Sang's plan and did nothing. Everyone who treated you like you were disposable. Everyone who values profit over patience. His voice hardened. "This hospital is going to change, and you're going to help me change it." The door opened, and Tank returned, looking grim. Dr. Jin Sang's car was found at Incheon Airport. He took a flight to Thailand 2 hours ago. We've got people tracking him, but let him run, for now. Once the police have all the evidence from Cho, they'll issue an international warrant, and the Shin family will be too busy dealing with their own problems to protect him. He glanced at Kimberly. They tend to dispose of assets that fail them. Kimberly's stomach turned. She'd saved young Sue's life, but she'd also set in motion a chain of events that would likely end with multiple deaths. The thought should have horrified her. Instead, she felt a cold sort of satisfaction. Dr. Jin Sang was willing to let a man die for money, had been willing to destroy her life just for being inconvenient. Whatever came to him now, he'd earned it. "Get some rest," Young Soo said to her. "Tank will take you to one of our apartments. It's secure, comfortable, and close to the hospital. Sleep, eat, process everything that's happened, and then we'll talk about your future." "I have my own apartment." "You had your own apartment. As of now, it's under surveillance by the Shin family. They know who you are, know where you live. Until this is resolved, you're staying somewhere safe." His tone left no room for argument. Tank stepped forward, his massive frame somehow gentle. "Come on, I'll drive you." Kimberly looked back at Young Soo one last time. He was already reaching for his phone, probably calling more of his people, setting more pieces in motion. Saving his life had pulled her into his world whether she wanted it or not. "Thank you," Young Soo said quietly, not looking up from his phone. "For my life, for the truth, for being brave when it would have been easier to walk away." "You're welcome," Kimberly said, and then, because she couldn't help herself, "Don't die again. That herb doesn't grow quickly." His laugh followed her out into the hallway. 3 weeks later, Kimberly stood in what used to be a storage room on the 4th floor of Seoul Memorial Hospital. It wasn't a storage room anymore. It was her office, spacious, well-lit, with windows overlooking the city and enough space for both her desk and a small laboratory setup where she could prepare medicines. The brass nameplate on the door read, Dr. Kimberly Harmon, Director of Integrative Medicine. The honorary doctorate had come through faster than she'd expected. Seoul National University had been very accommodating once Young-soo's lawyers explained the situation, and while she knew the degree was more political than academic, she'd earned it in the ways that mattered, not through exams, but through saving a life everyone else had given up on. Dr. Jin Sang had been arrested in Bangkok 2 days ago. He was fighting extradition, but Young-soo's lawyers were confident it was only a matter of time. Mr. Cho had turned state's witness and was in protective custody with his family. The Shin family's operations had been disrupted by a series of coordinated police raids, their leadership scrambling to avoid prosecution. And Kimberly had testified at 3 separate hearings, each time standing in front of rooms full of lawyers and judges and police officers, explaining how a rare neurotoxin could be mistaken for infection, how traditional medicine could save lives that modern science couldn't, how the most dangerous poison sometimes came from those who were supposed to heal. She'd expected them to dismiss her, to question her credentials, to treat her the way Dr. Jin Sang had, like she was barely literate and had no business speaking. Instead, they'd listened, they'd taken notes, they'd asked intelligent questions, and thanked her for her expertise. It turned out that having the Chen Syndicate's full support made people take you seriously. Knock knock. Kimberly looked up to see Young-soo standing in her doorway. He was dressed in a dark suit today, his arm still bandaged but healing well. The scar would be permanent, a raised line of pale tissue running from his wrist to his elbow, but the wound itself had closed cleanly, no infection, no complications. "Mr. Cho," she said, standing, "I didn't know you were visiting today. It's my hospital. I can visit whenever I want." He stepped inside, looking around the office with approval. "Nice space, better than a janitor's closet." "Significantly better," she agreed. "I wanted to check on your first cases. Tank said you've been busy." She had been. In 3 weeks, she'd consulted on 14 cases, patients whose conditions weren't responding to traditional treatment, whose symptoms didn't match any known diagnosis, whose doctors were running out of options. She'd approached each one the way her grandmother had taught her. Observe, listen, smell, trust your instincts. 3 of those cases had been solved with herbal remedies. 4 had been solved by recognizing environmental factors the doctors had missed. 2 had required her to work alongside the medical team, combining traditional and modern approaches. The other 5 she'd referred back to conventional medicine because sometimes antibiotics and surgery were exactly what the patient needed. "It's going well," Kimberly said. "Better than I expected. Some of the doctors are still skeptical, but others are genuinely interested in learning." "And the ones who aren't interested?" "They'll come around, or they'll leave. Either way, it's their choice." She smiled slightly. "I'm not trying to replace modern medicine. I'm trying to complement it, fill in the gaps, save the patients who fall through the cracks." Young-soo nodded, then walked to her window looking out at the city. "I wanted you to know that Dr. Jin Sang will be back in Seoul by the end of the month. His trial is scheduled for early next year." "I know. The prosecutor's office called me yesterday. They'll put you on the stand. Defense will try to tear you apart, question your credentials, your methods, your motives. They'll imply you're a charlatan who got lucky, or worse, that you poisoned me yourself to create a situation where you could look like a hero." Kimberly had already thought about this. had already prepared herself for it. Let them try. The evidence doesn't lie. The medical records show exactly what happened, how the antibiotics accelerated the necrosis, how the antidote reversed it. Any competent toxicologist will confirm my testimony. They will, Young-Soo agreed, but it won't be pleasant. They'll make you relive every moment. They'll question every decision. They'll try to make you doubt yourself. I won't. He turned to look at her, and something in his expression was softer than she'd ever seen it. No, I don't think you will. They stood in silence for a moment, and Kimberly realized they were standing in the exact same configuration as that first night. Her in her work clothes, him recovered but still marked by what he'd survived, both of them aware that their lives had changed in ways they were still discovering. I never thanked you properly, Young-Soo said quietly. You gave me a job, an office, a doctorate, and enough security to stop a small army. I think that counts as thanks. That's compensation, not thanks. He stepped closer. Thank you, Kimberly Harmon, for seeing me as a human being worth saving, not a mafia boss, not a dangerous criminal, not a problem to be solved, just a man who was dying and needed help. You're welcome, she said softly. And for what it's worth, thank you for seeing me, for recognizing that I was more than a cleaner with a mop, for giving me the chance to be who I actually am. Young-Soo smiled, and it was genuine. No calculation, no danger, just warmth. Partners, then. You keep saving lives, I'll keep making sure you have the resources to do it, and together we'll prove that sometimes the most powerful medicine comes from the most unexpected places. Partners, Kimberly agreed, and held out her hand. He shook it, his grip firm and warm. As he left, Kimberly turned back to her desk where case files were already stacking up, patients who needed help, mysteries that needed solving, lives that hung in the balance. She thought about her grandmother, about those hands mixing medicine in the Louisiana heat, about all the women who'd come before her and kept this knowledge alive through generations of dismissal and disrespect. They'd been invisible too, but they'd never stopped healing. And neither would she. She picked up the first file and got to work.